Hello everyone, this is Mr. Navratil here. In this video we are going to be taking a look at just the basics of Autodesk and TinkerCAD. So this is a 3D modeling software and it's pretty rudimentary, so you can do a lot of really cool things with it, but it's still pretty simplistic, so kind of easy to pick up. Now TinkerCAD is not just used for doing 3D models. The Autodesk software also allows you to work with something called circuits, which allows you to bring in, let's say, like an Arduino Uno and hook it up to different components and see how that works. And it also has another feature called CodeBox, which is essentially coding with blocks. But we're going to be focusing on just the 3D aspect of TinkerCAD today. So to get started, up in the top left, we're going to go ahead and hit the Create New Design button. And this is going to open up a new file for us. So here's our file. Now, if you ever want to get back to the dashboard, in other words, the front home screen, all you have to do is come up to the top left where the TinkerCAD logo is. If you click on that, it will bring you right back to the dashboard, which will show you all of the different parts that you have made in the past, and you can open up those parts and you can mess around with them. So we're going to go ahead and try that again. We're going to hit Create New Design and get into it. So the first thing that you need to know is this section is what we're going to be building off of. This is known as the work plane. And you can see it kind of resembles a piece of graph paper. If you zoom in, you notice that there are kind of the thicker blue lines, and then there's also the thinner blue lines, and they both represent a different measurement. At the moment, by default, this is set to metric units. So each one of these large boxes here, here, and here, between the thick lines, is representing 1 centimeter. As you zoom in, if you were to measure between here and here, the little blue boxes, that would be a measurement of 1 millimeter. Now you can change that entire setup. You can change the units of measurement by coming down where it says Edit Grid here, and we can change units from millimeters to inches if we wanted to. So if I said Update Grid. Now, this would be 1 inch from here to here, and this would be 1/10 of an inch between. But we're going to keep it on the millimeter side, so we'll update that back to millimeters there. So on our right, over on the program, we do have what we call our geometric menu. And basically what this allows us to do is pick and choose from pre-made shapes and click and drag them onto our work plane. So we're actually going to start off with a cylinder. Kind of looks like a tube. So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to bring that on to the work plane. From here, you notice it has all these little boxes around it, and you notice it also has these measurements as well. So there's a couple different things you can do with this. If you take one of the little boxes and you click and drag it, we can simply change the size that way. You can also change the size by clicking and dragging the height up and down. And you can also change the size of the cylinder a little bit more accurately. If you click on this box, it will keep these dimensions, in other words sizes, in view for you. And if you click on them and type in a number and hit enter, it will automatically change that size to the number that you chose. So 20 millimeters by 20 millimeters. In other words, that would be 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. And you can also just click and drag the object where you want it. And you can also change the elevation. So there's this little cone at the top. And what that allows you to do is change the object's height from the work plane. So if we're clicking and dragging, we can go below, or we can go above, or we can bring it back. Now again, if I click on the cone, and then I come down and I click on this dimension, I can change that back to 0, hit enter, and it will place it back on our work plane. So from here, it would be nice to be able to change our view as we're looking at this object. And there's a couple different things that you can do. On the mouse, if you'd like to change the perspective, in other words, the way that you're looking at it, if you hold down the right mouse button and you drag it, you can look at this from any view that you'd like. If you're trying to do something a little bit more intricate, if you look on the mouse and you use the mouse wheel, and we push that in, we can zoom into objects very close, and we can zoom out as much as we need as well. So those are just a couple different ways of changing the view. Now there's also a more traditional way. If we look in the top left, you notice there's what we call a view cube. If you click on the view cube in certain areas, it will change your view very specifically to the top, front, right, or the isometric corners, just like that. And you can always hit the home button, which will bring you back to the start, and zoom in and out with these buttons as well. But when you're using a mouse, it's typically easier to use the right mouse button and the scroll wheel. As we have one object in here, there are ways of taking an object you've created and making multiple of the same exact thing. So let's say we wanted a bunch of the same cylinder. You can click on the cylinder and come up to the top left. Right here, this is our copy button. So if I hit copy and then I hit paste using this, it will put in another cylinder, and you're able to just kind of click and drag wherever you'd like that on the work plane. Now instead of coming up and clicking on these buttons, it's also very common to use keyboard shortcuts. So if I click on the cylinder, I can simply hit Control-C on my keyboard and then hit Control-V, and it will place a copied piece in there. Now let's say you've done something on your TinkerCAD document that you would like to go back. You don't need it, or it was a mistake. You can come up to the top left and you can simply hit the Undo button. For a keyboard shortcut for undo, you could also hit Control-Z, and it will do kind of a step back in time. Now when we're placing objects in and we're taking a look at the sizes using these dimensions, there's also another tool that allows you to measure, and that's our ruler tool. It's next to the work plane tool here. So if I click on that and I bring it in, this allows us to take a look and get accurate measurements from a certain origin. So instead of the origin being down here in the bottom left, we can have the origin for the ruler here. And that just kind of keeps track of sizes for us. And let's get rid of that ruler just for a second so we can kind of clear this up. If we have a couple of different objects that are separate, like these two cylinders, and we'll bring in, let's say, maybe a cone as well. So let's say these three are separated. So if I click on it, it drags separately this way, drags separately that way, this one drags separately that way. Let's say I wanted to put them together so that when I click on them, they all drag together. There's a couple different ways we can go about this. You can simply take your mouse and click and drag and select all three of those objects at the same time. Or you can simply, let me click off, you can click on one object, and on your keyboard you can hold the Shift key, click on another object, and then click on the other object, and that will select all of them together. Once you have them all selected, if you come up to the top right here, this is our group button, and essentially what that does is it just takes objects and it puts them together. So once I click on that, let's say I click off now, I'm able to move all of these all at once. They are now connected. Okay, I am going to go back just a second here, and I'd like to also show another way of utilizing the group tool. So I'm actually going to get rid of these two things, and instead of bringing in a solid object, I'm going to bring in a hole. So the difference between this and this is a solid object. This will remove from a solid object once they are grouped. So if I can take this and put it somewhere around here, I can bring it up. Let's change the size so it's slightly smaller. So maybe if we click here, we'll change this to a 10 by a 10 circle. And we will change the elevation with our cone. We'll bring it up and kind of try and place it in the center here. Okay. Now at the moment, it still looks like it's adding material, but if we were, again, if I click on this object and hold Shift and click on the other, or another alternative is just to click and drag over both of them, and you go to Group, it will make that hole inside of the cylinder, however it is that you made it. Now, finally, let's say this was a part that we would like to send to the 3D printer. So if we were making a cap for something, this looks like it might be a cap. You can come up to the top right, and you can find this button. It says Export. If we click on Export, this allows us to change the file into a file that we could 3D print. Now, typically, we would always choose a .stl file. so that we could send it to a 3D printer. So if I was to click there, it will automatically download a file that we can simply just put it on an SD card and throw over in the 3D printer, and it could make this. Now there's another button up here. If instead of doing a 3D printer file, if you wanted to just take a picture of your design, you can very simply click on Send To, and then you can just hit this button here, Download Locally, and it will automatically download a picture of your design. And finally, if you're going to be sharing this with any of your classmates or with a teacher, and you would like to add in some type of note system to it so that they know what they're looking at, you can come up here. This is the farthest tool on the right, Notes tool. And then all you have to do is click where you'd like to make a note, and you can type in, "This is a cap." And we can hit Enter, and that will be there on the design for the next person to see. And it just helps clarify things. So that is the basics of TinkerCAD.